John Matthews had always dreamed of leaving behind the noise and rush of the city. He worked long hours in a crowded office, surrounded by the constant hum of computers and the chatter of coworkers. Every evening he would look out of his apartment window and imagine a quiet life, somewhere far away from the traffic, pollution, and endless deadlines. The thought of living closer to nature, where mornings began with birdsong and evenings ended with the soft rustle of leaves, filled him with hope. One day he stumbled upon something that seemed almost too good to be true. A tiny newspaper ad in a local paper, almost hidden at the bottom of a page. It read in small letters, "Cabin for sale, 25 cents. At first, John thought it was a joke. Who would sell a cabin for just 25 cents? He almost laughed aloud, imagining a trick or a misprint, but curiosity got the better of him. The ad included a phone number, and after a few calls, he discovered that it was real. The cabin existed, tucked away in a small town a few hours away from the city. The owner, an elderly man with a faintly trembling voice, insisted that the cabin had been abandoned for years and that he just wanted someone to take care of it. It sounded almost magical to John. A small piece of land, a cabin, and nature surrounding it, all for less than the price of a cup of coffee. Without much thought, he agreed to buy it, sending a quarter and the necessary documents to make it official. When John finally arrived at the cabin, he felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. The road leading to the property was narrow and winding, lined with tall trees that swayed gently in the breeze. Birds flew overhead, and the occasional squirrel darted across the path, adding a lively touch to the quiet surroundings. The cabin itself looked much older than he had imagined. Its wooden walls were faded, the paint peeling in long strips, and the roof sagged slightly under years of neglect. Weeds had grown freely around the porch, and the windows were coated with a thin layer of dust and cobwebs. Yet despite its worn appearance, John felt a strange sense of belonging. The cabin, though abandoned, seemed to welcome him, as if it had been waiting for someone to finally arrive. He spent the first day walking around the property, exploring the small yard and the nearby woods. The air was fresh and smelled faintly of pine and damp earth. He could hear the distant sound of a creek flowing, and every so often the wind whispered through the trees, creating a soft, almost musical sound. It was nothing like the city, and John felt a rare peace settle over him. As he stepped inside the cabin, he noticed the wooden floor creaked under his weight. Dust motes floated in the sunlight, streaming through the broken windows, and the faint smell of mildew mixed with the earthy scent of old wood. He ran his fingers over the walls and shelves, imagining how the cabin might have looked in its prime, filled with warmth and life. While exploring, John noticed some unusual details. In one corner of the room, the floorboards didn't align properly, creating a subtle ridge under his feet. There were scratches on the walls, long and thin, that seemed almost deliberate. At first he dismissed these oddities as signs of age or animal activity, but a small part of him felt a curious pull, urging him to look closer. That evening, after unpacking a few essentials, John decided to investigate the floorboards more carefully. With a flashlight in hand, he gently lifted the corner of a worn rug that covered the suspicious area. To his astonishment, he discovered a trapdoor, cleverly hidden beneath the floor. His heart began to race. He had always been a curious person, but now curiosity mixed with a hint of fear. The trapdoor was old and slightly warped, but it opened with a cautious push. A narrow staircase descended into darkness, the air coming from below damp and cold. John hesitated for a moment, staring into the blackness. He could not see the bottom, and an eerie silence seemed to come from the depths. Yet something compelled him to go further. Gripping his flashlight tightly, he descended step by step, the wood groaning beneath his weight. Each step felt like a step into another world, a hidden place that had been untouched for years, maybe decades. As he reached the bottom, John felt the cool air brush against his face. The tunnel stretched before him, narrow but long, with walls made of old, uneven bricks. Water had seeped in through cracks, creating small puddles on the floor, and the faint smell of damp earth mixed with something older, something difficult to describe. He shone his flashlight along the tunnel walls, trying to understand what he had found. The bricks were covered in patches of moss, and there were signs of digging, as if someone had worked carefully to keep this passage hidden. With each cautious step, John's excitement grew, but so did his unease. He realized that this was no ordinary cellar or storage space. The tunnel twisted and turned in unexpected directions, and shadows danced in the flashlight beam. At one point, he noticed a faint outline in the corner of the tunnel. As he moved closer, his blood ran cold. There, hidden in the shadows, were skeletal remains, some half buried under dirt, some resting in what seemed like carefully arranged piles. John stumbled back, dropping his flashlight. It rolled along the ground, casting wild beams of light across the walls, illuminating the dark shapes in a terrifying dance. For a moment, he could not breathe. His mind raced, trying to process what he was seeing. Who had placed these bodies here? How long had they been there? And why had no one discovered them before? He could see signs of decay and age, but also a deliberate effort to hide the remains from view. The realization hit him hard. This cabin, which had seemed like a perfect escape from the world, was concealing a terrible secret. Shaking, John regained his composure and carefully took out his phone. His hands trembled as he dialed the local authorities. He explained what he had found. Keeping his voice steady despite the fear clawing at him, the dispatcher assured him that help was on the way and advised him to stay away from the tunnel. John stepped back, staring at the trapdoor, now aware that this discovery would change his life forever. As he waited, he could not stop thinking about the cabin and the hidden tunnel. The peaceful place he had imagined, the dream of a quiet life surrounded by nature, now carried an unsettling weight. He looked at the worn wooden walls, the quiet trees outside, and the soft sounds of the wind. Everything seemed unchanged on the surface, yet below a dark story had been hidden, untouched for years. Hours later, police arrived, and John watched as they cautiously explored the tunnel, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. He felt a mix of relief and fear. Relief that he had called for help, and fear that such a terrible secret had been so close to him. Even as the authorities worked, John could not shake the feeling that the cabin had been waiting for someone to uncover its hidden truth. He realized that curiosity and courage had led him to this moment, but also that some discoveries could never be unseen. By the end of the day, the area was secured and John had stepped back from the immediate danger. Yet his mind kept returning to the hidden tunnel, the careful construction of the passage, and the stories that might never be fully known about the lives that had ended there. For John, the cabin was no longer just a dream escape. It was a reminder of the unexpected mysteries that the world could hold, and of the fine line between ordinary life and hidden history. Despite the fear and shock, John could not ignore the strange sense of connection he felt to the place. The cabin, abandoned and mysterious, had drawn him in. He had come seeking peace and solitude, but instead he had found a story buried in silence, waiting to be discovered. That night, as he sat outside watching the stars emerge in the clear sky, he thought about the lives that had passed through the tunnel and the secrets that had remained hidden for so long. The forest was calm, the air cool, and yet somewhere beneath his feet a hidden history whispered its presence. The next morning, John Matthews woke up early, but sleep had not come easily. The cabin that had once felt peaceful now seemed heavier, as if it carried the weight of the hidden tunnel beneath. He kept thinking about the skeletal remains he had seen, stacked carefully and deliberately, hidden away from the world. Questions kept running through his mind. Who had placed the bodies there? Why had no one discovered them until now? And how could such a small, ordinary cabin hide something so terrifying? By the time the sun rose, casting a warm golden light over the trees in the cabin, the authorities were already at the site. Police officers, forensic experts, and detectives arrived with careful steps, flashlights in hand, equipment in tow. They cordoned off the area, setting up temporary barriers to keep curious onlookers away. John watched from a distance, feeling a strange mix of relief and fear. Relief that help had arrived, and fear that he had stumbled upon something far bigger and more complex than he could ever have imagined. The officers approached him, asking for a detailed account of what he had seen. John spoke slowly, describing the trapdoor, the narrow tunnel, the brick walls, and the bodies he had discovered. He tried to stay calm, but the memory of stepping into the dark, cold tunnel still made his hands shake. One officer nodded and promised him that everything would be investigated carefully. For the first time, John felt a small sense of reassurance. He had done the right thing by reporting his discovery. The forensic team carefully entered the tunnel. John could see their flashlights sweeping across the brick walls and the damp floor. Every so often he heard muted sounds of equipment being set down, or officers whispering to each other. He realized that this hidden tunnel, long ignored and unnoticed, was now the center of a serious investigation. Experts examined every corner, taking careful notes, photographs, and measurements. The skeletal remains were treated with great respect, each one documented before being removed. It was clear that the tunnel had been in use many years ago, but exactly when and for what reason was still a mystery. As John watched the process, he felt a strange connection to the cabin he had purchased. He had come here seeking peace, a quiet place away from the stress of city life. Instead, he had uncovered a story buried in darkness, a secret that had remained hidden for decades. The cabin, which had seemed abandoned and unimportant, was now a place of historical and emotional significance. John felt both proud and uneasy. Proud that he had found and reported the tunnel, but uneasy about the lives and stories that had ended there. Days passed, and the investigation continued. News reporters arrived, curious about the man who had bought a cabin for 25 cents and discovered a hidden tunnel filled with skeletal remains. John spoke carefully to the media, answering questions without exaggeration, simply explaining what had happened. The story quickly caught the public's attention. People were fascinated and horrified at the same time. A tiny, ordinary cabin in a quiet town had become the center of a real-life mystery, and John's discovery had changed the way the world looked at that small piece of land. As the authorities dug deeper, they uncovered more details about the cabin's history. The elderly man who had sold it, long gone, had inherited it from a relative who had once been reclusive and private. Locals recalled stories of unusual events, rumors that had circulated for years, but no one had concrete proof of anything. The tunnel and the hidden remains answered many questions while creating even more. Experts determined that the skeletal remains were decades old, suggesting that this had been going on long before John had arrived. The fact that it had remained undiscovered all these years added to the sense of mystery and unease. John could not stop thinking about the people whose lives had ended in the tunnel. He imagined their stories, their hopes and fears. He tried to picture what life had been like in that small town years ago, and what might have led them to that hidden place. It was a heavy thought, but it gave him a sense of responsibility. He realized that by discovering the tunnel, he had given those long-forgotten lives a chance to be acknowledged and remembered. The cabin itself changed in John's eyes. What had once been a dream escape, a quiet place for reflection and peace, now carried the weight of history. He walked around the property, noticing details he had overlooked before. The old fence posts, the worn path leading to the forest, the creek nearby that sang a soft melody. Everything seemed the same on the surface, yet below a dark and hidden past had been revealed. John felt that the cabin had a story to tell, and that story was no longer silent. As weeks passed, John continued to visit the cabin, though now with a new perspective. He spent time helping the investigators understand the layout of the property and shared any small details he remembered. At the same time, he explored the surrounding woods, taking long walks to clear his mind. Nature offered him comfort, but the tunnel and its hidden history remained in his thoughts. The experience had changed him. He understood the fragility of life, the hidden stories all around us, and the importance of curiosity coupled with caution. Despite the horror of the discovery, John found a strange sense of fulfillment. He had uncovered a mystery that had remained hidden for decades. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and the unknown, and had acted responsibly. People often told him he was brave, but John felt that he had only done what anyone should have done. Still, he could not deny the lingering sense of unease. The cabin, the tunnel, and the skeletal remains had left a permanent mark on him, a reminder that even ordinary places can hold extraordinary secrets. As the investigation concluded, authorities sealed the tunnel to prevent anyone from entering again. Experts ensured that the skeletal remains were treated respectfully, and local officials promised to preserve the cabin's history. John watched as the area was cleaned and documented. It was no longer just a small, abandoned cabin. It had become a site of historical significance, a reminder of the past, and a testament to the importance of discovery and honesty. John realized that his life had changed in ways he had never expected. He had started this journey seeking solitude and peace, and instead he had found history, mystery, and responsibility. The cabin, once a simple dream, had become a place of reflection and learning. John often sat outside in the evenings, watching the sun set behind the trees, listening to the soft sounds of nature. He thought about the people who had lived, worked, and ultimately ended their lives in the tunnel beneath the cabin. In some way, he felt connected to them, as if discovering the hidden past had brought him closer to understanding the depth of human experience. Over time, the cabin became a symbol for John, a symbol of curiosity, courage, and respect for history. He continued to visit occasionally, taking careful walks in the surrounding forest and reflecting on the events that had unfolded. The experience had taught him that life is full of surprises, some beautiful, some terrifying, and that even the most ordinary places can hide extraordinary stories. John had learned to approach life with an open heart, a careful mind, and a willingness to face the unknown, knowing that sometimes discovery comes at the most unexpected moments. Even after many months, John could not forget the tunnel and the skeletal remains. The memory stayed with him, a quiet reminder of what he had uncovered and the responsibility he carried to remember it. Though he moved on with his life, the cabin remained a place of importance. It had given him a story, a lesson, and a connection to the past that he would carry forever. And in that quiet, abandoned place, surrounded by trees and the soft sounds of nature, John Matthews found a new understanding of courage, curiosity, and the hidden histories that wait patiently beneath the surface of everyday life.